Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here. Mrs. Booten, can I ask you to say the pledge? to me? Board members, are there any modifications to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Public comments. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public wishing to offer public comment have the opportunity to do so. A public comment sign-up sheet was made available until 7 p.m. Board meetings are available for viewing via live stream on the district's YouTube channel. As with all comments, please be aware that it's the board's regular practice to not directly discuss, ask questions, or take action on public comments until the time has been taken to gather adequate information. The board is there to listen. Lack of action or direct response following public comments does not imply any lack of interest in what is being shared. Per Board Policy 2.230, time allotted for each person to speak during public comment may be shortened. We will not be doing that this evening. The board must protect the civility and decorum of the meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board, our district leadership team, and the democratic process in your public comment. Please include your name, whether you are a resident of the district. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Hanlon will provide a reminder at the end of your time. Please be factual and courteous and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. We have one person, Erica Gray Parker.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Erica Bray Parker. I am a resident of Wheaton. My husband and I both raised our 2 boys through the Longfellow, Franklin, and Wheaton North area. I have the honor of serving on the Wheaton City Council, as many of you know. But tonight I speak as a grateful resident of our community. As this board transitions to new members, I felt that it was appropriate to say thank you. Thanks to the current board, thanks to the candidates that ran this past time and putting themselves out there, thanks to the administration for all that you do for our students and your leadership to this district, thanks to the teachers and the staff that care for our children every single day of the school year, and sometimes on the weekends. But specifically tonight, I'd like to say a special thank you to board member Susan Booten as she transitions off the board. Her time commitment these past several years is to be commended. Most importantly, I'd like to recognize her dedication to all of our students, her well-informed words, her mindful actions as an elected official are a model for others. She leads with love, and that's important, and it's a very valuable trait to have as a decision maker for our schools. So thank you very much. I wish the new board well, and I also wish the staff and administration good luck as the school year winds down. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bray Parker. Okay, moving on, we have one action item this evening. Two, I'm sorry. Approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, I just have one introduction on your personnel report this evening. You are approving for employment, a new assistant principal at Edison Middle School. Jim Zimmerman is here this evening. Jim emerged from an interview process, had an incredible applicant pool for that position, both some really high quality candidates in the district and outside of the district. And Jim emerged from that process and the listening panels that went with it. So I'm just pleased to introduce Jim. He's here with his wife tonight as his employment gets approved. So Jim, welcome.
Are there any questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the personnel report as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Booten.
Second.
Second by Mr. Hanlon. Ms. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes. Welcome. The next up is the approval of the WWEA contract. Dr. Schuler?
Thank you. I'm pleased this evening to bring to the board for action a recommendation to approve a new collective bargaining agreement with WWEA, as I'm waiting for that presentation to come up. Perfect. Thank you. Share your excitement. So we're pleased to bring this to you tonight. I just want to spend a few minutes, make sure I give the board and certainly the community a little bit of background on the collective bargaining agreements, some of the highlights. Information that's being shared with you tonight was included with the board packet that went out in the board packet. It was on a two-page summary document, but again, just want to spend a few minutes providing this information. I'm not sure if I'm on here. So a little bit of background and history. Our current contract with WWEA, that's the organization that represents about 1,155 licensed staff members in the district, actually expires on June 30, 2023. The most recent contract with WWEA was actually a 4-year agreement that ran 2018 to 2022. But last year, we agreed to extend that agreement for 1 additional year at the terms of the previous agreement. So it was really a 5-year contract with our teachers. And just a reminder that in 2018, with the contract that was in place, there were some pretty significant adjustments with that last contract. Most notably, we implemented a strategic compensation model that replaced what was the salary schedule that was a part of the agreement. We had a strategic compensation team that spent about 2 years. It was a collaborative team of association membership, members of our leadership team that spent a couple of years designing that process following the previous collective bargaining agreement. We included some new elements in that agreement, most notably micro-credentials to incentivize professional growth as an additional means to accelerate salary and compensation for our teachers. There were salary increases that were tied to CPI that had a floor and a ceiling. We still incentivized graduate work, right, as part of that salary movement. And at the time, we did make an adjustment to the teacher work day, not the student day, to kind of equalize some time across the district. So that's been in place for 5 years. The current process that we've just completed and are bringing to you this evening, that began on July 13th of last year. So I want you to recognize this is going back almost a year when we first met with the board to review the bargaining team process, bring to the board a recommendation for the district's bargaining team and process. Fast forward to October of 2022. Met with the board again to review timeline, the specific bargaining team, and some initial market comparison data that we brought. I think this would be a good time for me to just take a quick second and recognize specifically the members of the bargaining team. If I can put my hands on that, because it's on a separate piece of paper. Give me just a second. Sorry. Here it is. I do want to recognize the members of the bargaining team from both sides that have worked hard on this contract, certainly for the district, led by Dr. Charlie Kyle and Brian O'Keefe. Also joining them on the bargaining team were Matt Biskin, Lori Campos, Dave Bendis, John Pilkington, Jeff Mitchum, Derek Edwards, Christy Kuntz, and Lamaris Pueo. From WWEA, their bargaining team was Shannon Worcester, Tom Grace, Chuck Corbett, Sarah LaRocco, Mark Hibben, Pearl Anderson, Eric Jensen, Melissa Nillis, Eric Laird, and Matt Dudek. Recognize in any situation, committing the time to a bargaining process is a very, very intensive process, has significant implications, so I want to thank all of them. That in January of this year, we met with the board to review the 5-year financial forecast and review your financial picture. We met again in February to give a bargaining update on where we were. March, we came back together and reviewed some updated market comparison data and just quick comments on that. So We were proud of the work we did in building a strategic compensation model, but we recognized as we moved into this bargaining process that did make it difficult to look at true market comparisons. It's a little easier when you have a schedule that you can compare. And so we had to really work hard with the association, take a step back and really look at competitiveness, certainly of our teachers, look at competitiveness across kind of all experience years within the district. And that actually kind of caused us to reframe a little bit where we were when we got to that March meeting. And then, of course, in April, we brought to the board a tentative agreement that we reviewed the last time that we met with you. In terms of the actual bargaining process, that began on January 26th of this year. Our teams met in 8 pretty lengthy bargaining sessions. They reached the tentative agreement on April the 6th. That agreement was ratified by WWEA the week of April the 17th. They went through their process of presenting information, giving their members an opportunity to ask questions and then vote on the agreement. That agreement was approved, I think, pretty soundly with great support from WWEA. We appreciate that. I think it was approved with about a 92% pass rate, which is great. And so it's here in front of you this evening. Just a quick reminder of really 4 main goals that drove the process, at least from the administrative side. I think essential that our labor contracts provide essential labor stability, certainly within our workforce. That's been significantly talked about across education sectors and really important. We need to make sure with a contract we do balance economic realities with the continued need to present balanced budgets. We have not been in front of the board ever with a budget that's not balanced, and we don't intend for that to change. And so this certainly has to fit inside of those parameters. We want to make sure that we address the Vision 2026 goal to recruit, hire, and retain high-quality staff. I have heard regularly over the last couple of months, I think a point of pride in the community is the quality of our teachers and our staff, and we need to continue to keep that the case. And then finally, we need to make sure that our contract supports the strategic work that we're doing, and we highlighted 3 areas in particular: our learning acceleration work, expansion of post-secondary opportunities, and supporting the social emotional needs of our students through school connectedness. So Dr. O'Keefe is going to run through the next 2 slides with the contract highlights and some of the financial pieces, and then I'll come back to wrap it up with a recommendation.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Schuler. These highlights are attached to the action item in the board pack with some more depth, but just some real quick points to share with the public. This is a 4-year agreement similar to our 2018 agreement. So it begins on July 1st of this year, runs through the end of June in 2027. One notable highlight from this is the expansion of our elementary schedule, and specifically our school day for our students on the elementary level. That's expanded by 10 minutes. So the start time for elementary students next year will be at 9:05, 10 minutes in advance of where they're at today. And that does a couple things for us. One, it allows us to group our elementary specials in a schedule that's consistent from a time increment perspective, and certainly allows our teaching staff to maximize their academic instructional time through those uninterrupted academic blocks. And then secondly, that additional time supports, as Dr. Schuler mentioned, our learning acceleration work and certainly those opportunities for students. Few other kind of high-level highlights. We are bringing back a formal mentoring program for our first-year teachers, a dual interest from both parties that we're excited to bring back and start next year. We did look at adding and then really kind of normalizing some of our extra duty stipends. Part of that process going forward will be to bring the extra duty stipend team back together, which is chaired by myself, to ensure that we've got the right stipends in the right place to support all of our students and give them the best opportunities for additional academic and athletic opportunities outside of the typical day. We have put specific retirement language into the contract to ensure that we can guardrail the board's desire to ensure that we do not encumber any TRS penalties during the life of the contract. So that is actually a 4-year notification process. The first time frame for that is this specific July. It's actually July 15th. And then finally, on the major highlight side of things, our Jefferson Early Childhood Center planning days. On days where we had an actual holiday on a Monday. Our ECC program at Jefferson missed out on plan giving that during week because it was not shifted to Tuesday. Students were back in on Tuesday. So moving forward for any planned holiday that's on the school calendar on a Monday, students will not be in session on Tuesday. That'll be a specific planning day for our staff at Jefferson. And then just a few things on the compensation side. Obviously, in a 4-year contract, we look at specific increases each year. So in years 1, 2, and 3, we have a 6% salary increase. And what we're also doing to ensure, to the best of our ability, that we still have a competitive contract is we're increasing our starting teaching salary by 5.5% each year. So a small gap between where the existing staff is at and then still being hopefully opportunistic and competitive by bringing in new staff year after year. And as you can see, that's set in stone for what that looks like for the next 3 years. And then year 4, we move back to that blended CPI model that we've had in place for the existing contract. That floor, the change here is the floor is at 3.5% with a ceiling at 4.5%. And we don't have that final base salary range yet, obviously, because that depends on CPI, but we've moved back to a model that we currently have in place in year 4. Last little note on the compensation side, micro-credentials was the program developed out of the expiring contract to offer teachers learning opportunities and reward them for those learning opportunities and fulfilling them on the financial side of things. We've changed how that actually works from what was referred to as stacks, meaning a certain number of micro-credentials that you had to do to earn dollars, to individual completion. So the overall opportunity for staff is still capped at $1,000. Instead of looking at stacks, now it's just specifically 5 opportunities in a given year that they can earn at $200 per individual opportunity for a total of no more than $1,000. One other little note on there that we added, just looking at where salaries potentially could be in the future and the impact that micro-credentials could have. While it's a great chance for our staff to learn and grow financially, we also recognize that there may be some an opportunity for us to look at capping in some places. So we've written into the contract specifically, once a staff member reaches a salary of $145,000, they still have the chance to go through and learn through the micro-credentials, but there will be no financial incentive to that specific learning.
So just coming back to the goals that I led with, same 4 goals. I believe very strongly that the contract's been presented to you this evening as recommendation does address those 4 areas. Certainly is going to continue to help us provide essential labor stability. We believe that it is a contract that we will be able to work with moving forward. We will be able to continue to present balanced budgets to the board. We believe it addresses that critical goal that you have stated in your Vision 2026 plan, and we believe it's going to continue to support our strategic work. So happy to entertain any questions, but we do recommend that the Board of Education approve the collective bargaining agreement with WWEA for the next 4 years.
Board members, any comments, questions?
So first off, I appreciate the comprehensiveness of the process and all the involvement, as you mentioned. First off, these contracts are much more comprehensive than just compensation. That was articulated in the presentation tonight. A few things really stand out to me. I like the mentorship schedule or role being brought back into our contract. Really appreciate the 10 extra days of elementary instruction. Doesn't sound like much, but it's almost 5 extra days of school for the elementary kids. That's important, and I appreciate how we're able to refine the individual school day to do that. In terms of the compensation model, certainly competitiveness was one of the key things, and I really appreciate year 4. We're getting back on that blended CPI model. That's going to be important for us. And then finally, the retirement, the 4-year advance notice on the retirement is really going to be important for us from the standpoint of long-range financial planning, as well as the staffing strategy that we have to put forth. So I really appreciate those aspects of it. I think it's a good agreement, and I'm ready to support it.
Mrs. Booten, did you want to go?
Sure. I echo everything Brad said. I really truly appreciate all the efforts put forth by both the WWEA and the administration in the negotiation process. And I think that we have come to a good place where we know we need to stay competitive with the market. We know that we will need to watch the budget a few years down the road. But I also, that's nothing new to a Board of Education. For as long as I have been attending meetings before I was on the board and been on the board, that there's always something in the distance that we have to prepare for and plan for that's coming. And so that is not a new concept for a Board of Education, and I think there is the time necessary to put the thought into that and what that might look like a few years down the road. So while it's something that we are certainly aware of and is a little bit of a concern, it's, for me personally, it's not terrible concern because, like I said, we're used to being in this position, and we with the integrity of the boards that we have in place, we figure it out. And I have faith that this next board and the board after that will plan for this properly and figure out that issue. The other thing I want to say is having, talking to more teachers and administrators as I retire from the board. And one thing I want to say is that compensation is one thing, and we can, obviously salary and benefits are a huge part for anybody. I don't care what career you're in, but I also want to acknowledge the difficulties of the past 3 years that our teachers and our administrators have been under, that those scars are still fresh with a lot of our staff and our administrators, and we need, a part of this whole contract is that we can't lose sight of the mental health of our teachers and our staff. And I know Dr. Schuler and your team, I would just ask that you please continue those surveys of our teachers and to listen to their feedback and address their concerns as best as we can, creating that culture of support and recognize that there are still things that out there that in traumas, quite frankly, that a lot of our teachers and staff have gone through these past 3 years. And I want to say to our community that part of, along those lines, part of keeping our teachers here is treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And that they have, as I said, they've been through a lot, they've seen a lot, they've taken a lot from our community. And I truly hope that we can get back to the respect that the teaching profession deserves, and that I think a lot of our parents have, but I think that we need to turn a corner here now, in that we are, I think as a nation, we are officially done with the pandemic. I think on May 11th is the date that the president said, and let's put that behind us and let's get back to conversations and in a respectful way, and help our teachers achieve the goals that they want to achieve with our students. So I appreciate all the work, and I fully support this new contract. Thank you.
Any other board members? Mrs. Kolovitz?
I don't have any questions because, as Dr. Schuler mentioned, we've had many sessions where we've had the opportunity, we've taken that advantage of that opportunity to ask those questions. But I just thought it was important to outline how I approach this decision, and so I wanted to do that. And so I started off with a question of what is our job, and it's to do what's best for students and the school and the taxpayers that support the school district. And I think the best way that we can do that is to provide a high-quality education at an effective use of taxpayer dollars. And in talking with our administrators and looking at research on how do you do that, how do you provide a good school district, it seems that the most effective thing you can do is what happens in the classroom. And so that's why part of our strategic plan is having a high quality staff. And so the first factor that I looked at was the market analysis we talked about. And it was clear from those, and as it was mentioned, it's not an apples to apples comparison, that we have to understand the nuances of our pay structure, that we weren't in a competitive position. And so I think this gets us to a competitive position, but we also need to remain competitive and sort of skate to where the puck is going, and I think it makes sure we're competitive for the next 4 years. I also looked at our teacher retention rates, and they've declined. Our total retention rates were 93% in the 2019-2020 school year, and then dipped to 89% in 2021 and 2022. It was a bigger dip when you excluded retirements, and then the state averages, retention has gotten better. So we were trending in a direction that was different from the state averages, and so that confirmed what I think the market analysis showed, that I didn't think we were as competitive as we need to be. I also thought it was important to think about if we can do this within our means. And in talking with administrators, I think we can. We talked about how there's been a decline in enrollment, and I think through effective use of resources, this is something that we can do within our means. I also thought it was important to think about the opportunity cost of what happens if we don't do this. And I think that there are consequences of not being competitive. There are consequences for our students of doing that, and there are also consequences of what that says to the workforce that is so critical for the education of our children. And so for those reasons, I thought that was my thought process, and I think this is really important for our district, and I support it as well.
Anybody else? No, Mrs. Butler?
As we're ping-ponging, I just want to start saying that I think we have some amazing teachers and staff, and I think, definitely should be a priority to support them. Kind of agonized over the past week, looking through the 5-year budget, looking at the draft that we received, and I know I do have some questions on some little things, but I think that's not the time right now. But I'm concerned that this coming year, we have to make up $2.5 million in our budget by extending this contract as is, as well as the following year with compounding that. And I'm not super sure what the reduction in staff looks like to allow that. So I have concerns about that. And then knowing that in years 3 and 4, we don't really quite know what it's going to look like. And I just feel hesitant about where we're at. So that's the conundrum. It's difficult for me to think of putting a plan in place that we really don't know how we're going to execute in years 3 and 4. I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea, but
Okay.
we'll ping-pong it around.
Yeah, no, I hear what Angela's saying. I mean, it's, there is gaps that we have to figure out how to close, right? We saw that in the models. So I would change it a little bit, say we do kind of know. We know what the gap is. We have to figure out how to close it. So, but I do agree with you that that's a concern. We have to figure out how to close it. And I don't think anyone at the table would disagree with you on that. I've done this before. I always say there's two choices in my mind, right? There's the I need to close the financial gap, right, and have to make some tough choices to do that, or I have to look at where we place in the market, and we were below market in most cases, and we needed to fix that. I think the market is not as elastic. I think if you make a bad choice in the market, it takes years to recover from that. There's reputational things that don't swing on a dime. Don't swing on a year, they swing on multiple years. And I think the challenge to close the gap, and it's a challenge, we have to figure it out, but I'd rather deal with that challenge than have a multi-year market impact to us that is almost, in my opinion, much harder to recover from. So I share your concern on the gap, but to me, the market dynamics are so much more important to address. And, that's me, the big trade-off. That's the big choice. And that's why I will support it, right? I think all the objectives on the screen, I agree with completely. I love how it supports our goals, our outcomes, what we're trying to achieve. But really what it boils down to are those two choices. Am I going to close that financial gap, or am I going to, fix a multi-year market, what I call a multi-year market problem. So that's why I believe that's more important right now. But I understand your reflection for sure.
I think when I think of the things that we have on the table coming to us, like dealing with all-day kindergarten, dealing with the middle school renovations, looking at Sherman Durgis and having to increase that, the aides, like our aid situation and needing to readdress their compensation. That seems like a lot of expenditures coming up, and we seem to be adding to spending rather than getting revenue. I think my big question is, so this initial year, there's going to be some natural attrition with class sizes getting bigger, so we won't need as much staff. But are we not returning staff, or is it going to be future staff, that positions that are eliminated? Does that make sense?
It does, and I guess I'll just remind you, every year you go through a process in April where you
Right.
release some staff every year. You do that every year based on the fact that you don't know definitively what your staffing plan and model is going to look like in the fall. And I would answer this question by saying, I think to Board Member Booton's point, there are so many variables that come into that budget that comes together as we move into the fall, and there's a lot of different levers that are going to be adjusted and pulled on. So if you asked me a question right now to say what exactly is our staffing plan going to look like in the middle of August when schools open, I don't know that right now, right? There's too many other variables that are going to shift that may dictate what and how many and who those staff are, and other changes that are going to be made. And so that is constantly developing the budget. What Dr. O'Keefe does is sort of balance all these levers that go up and down even through the summer. But I can assure you they will be balanced come July. When the budget is presented in July, that budget is going to be balanced, and we're going to prioritize the strategic work that we've said is critically important for our students. So I cannot give you a list of every single thing, that every position that might be here right now that might not be here in the fall, but there's just a whole lot of things that are going to impact what that's going to be. It will balance. I promise you it will balance.
Is it safe to assume that tenured staff will remain? Is that a safe assumption? Or
Any tenured staff member is back next year. We
Right,
did not take a step to release any tenured staff member, and so that by
those
law, that is not going to change now.
but those that were on the RIF list may not return.
And that is the case every year, regardless of whether we're making a budget adjustment or not.
Mr. Long, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way that Rob described it. It's really no different than in business. And I mean, I know I've seen it in our business where we've had to increase wages significantly because our turnover rate was too high. And I see it much the same way, because I will be honest, I was initially a little bit troubled with the higher percentages in year 3. I expected really 2 years of a little higher rate because, the first year of significant inflation, we fell behind some with the current contract compared to where inflation was. But then when you look at that, where the market competitiveness, the most important thing we need is good teachers, and we need to be able to attract good teachers. I think I am also concerned about the decisions we're going to have to make, but once you get past 2 years, there's a lot of assumptions in that 5-year plan that are, it's really just a model. It's not a finite budget like we build every year, and there's so many things that can change, from state funding to new grants to who knows what. And I'm confident we'll be able to roll up our sleeves and do that work and figure out what those decisions are. So I think, while it's difficult and expensive, I don't think we have another option.
Anything else before I go? getting to speak last, everybody has said a lot of the things, so I'm not going to repeat that. Where I'm going to focus my comments on is retention. 2018 is a completely different world than we live in today. The role of our teachers, our specialists, is so different, and the challenges that they've had to face. They've had to stretch and grow in ways that we never imagined. I'm sure they never imagined. So we've invested a lot in them, but they've invested a lot in us. And so the way that I look at this is it's so important for us to retain our quality staff, not have them go to these other districts. You know, when we did this contract 5 years ago, a lot of the other surrounding districts had the opportunity to negotiate in there and during those troubling times. And while I completely support the decision that we did back when we did to extend the contract for stability, we did lose pace with competitiveness with other areas. So I look at this contract as yes, it's nice to be able to we always want to be able to attract quality staff, but to me it's so important that we retain our staff. So hearing no other comments, I'm going to move to approve the collective bargaining agreement with the WWEA for the period of July 1st, 2023 through July 30th, 2027 as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Paulson. Ms. Hutchinson, will you call the roll? Yes.
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 Motion passes. Okay. Oral report. Referral GPS and social emotional learning.
Absolutely. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Salagi, who is going to give the board a kind of a quick update on our SEL framework and focus for this year, and then he's got a special guest that I'll let him introduce.
Good evening, board.
You're good.
Good. Yeah. All right. Thanks. I need that reminder too. Good evening, members of the Board of Education. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about social emotional learning tonight. You'll be hearing a little bit from me just on an update on our goals. I know we did a full report in December on our goals and strategies, but I'll be updating you a little bit on that, and then we'll spend the majority of our time tonight actually highlighting one of our key strategies for this school year. I want to start where I always start our presentations on social emotional learning, and that's reminding you of our framework for SEL. This was developed in 2018 and 19 by a large group of district stakeholders. Every piece of work on this is rooted in research that either impacts student learning, school connectedness, or emotional or behavioral health. This is what defines social emotional learning in District 200. We felt the need to develop a comprehensive framework because the breadth and depth of SEL is large. And this allows us to align our strategies and programming with this framework. So as we define SEL, it's really right here in this framework, and any strategies or programming that we ever bring forward or that you'll hear about will always have alignment to our framework. A little bit further on that, what's our purpose of social emotional learning in District 200? Really three key areas. First and foremost, always is to improve student learning, right? SEL serves as a complement and an enhancement to improve student learning in all of our schools for all of our kids. Secondly, it's to provide supports for our students who are in need of either emotional or behavioral health supports. So we want to be able to do that at a really high level in a multitude of ways. And then lastly, for all kids, we want to make sure we're enriching the school experience, right? And that's going to happen not only through the relationships they have with one another or with the staff members in our schools, but through all the other opportunities outside of the classroom that kind of make their lives enriched in the school days. So those are really the three key purposes of SEL that we're always trying to get at. Just a reminder, whenever we program or we talk about strategies for SEL, we talk about them in layers, and you'll see this play out throughout the presentation tonight, even as I share some data with you, that some strategies are for all students, and then some strategies are for specific students with specific needs. So not all students need to access all programs or all strategies that we have in place. A refresher on our goals and strategies this year, and then I'll get to the bottom two, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time before I turn it over to our friend tonight, Amit. First and foremost, as you all know, I don't think an SEL presentation ever goes by where we don't talk about probably our most treasured or core value, which is to make sure all kids are connected to school through a trusted adult. This will always be a goal. It will always be a part of our strategic work. It's on your board dashboard. Along with extracurricular participation, that's one of the key ways that we actually connect our kids to school is through clubs, activities, athletics, the fine arts. So those are two key goals that we're working through this year and every year. We look forward to even bringing you more information on that as that data comes in the next month. Another goal of ours this year is to ensure behavioral wellness for all students. We're attacking that with a lot of different strategies. We know when kids are behaving well in class, they're learning at higher levels. We're continuing our work with Acknowledge, Care, Tell, which is really helping our 8th through 12th graders to acknowledge and care for their friends and tell a trusted adult when they see signs of suicide or depression in a friend. That's happening through our Signs of Suicide program. And not only is that a specific program, but we also think that it destigmatizes mental health. So we continue that work. It's a key goal and strategy of ours. Tomorrow we're kicking off our work around crisis response and emotional wellness support. While Dr. Kyle has done amazing work at getting good emergency and safety response plans in place, we're now actually looking at, all right, what is the mental health side of this? We are training our staff members in Prepare, which is the gold standard in crisis response whenever a traumatic event happens. That starts tomorrow. It's a 2-day training. We're looking forward to, by the end of next year, coming to you saying, hey, we've got all of our school supports staff members trained in the gold standard by the National Association of School Psychologists. So big part of our work that's ongoing this year. And then growth mindset culture, right? This is a piece that when I say enhancing student learning, I've been fortunate to partner with Mrs. Murphy this year and her work in the math implementation. We integrated a lot of growth mindset work in there because teacher mindset impacts student mindset, which impacts student learning and achievement and outcomes. So I know that you heard about those goals in December, but I wanted to remind you of just the work that's ongoing. Tonight, last two goals we're going to focus on. First is later data and assessment. You know, often I get the question of how do you know if kids are doing well in this area, or what information do you look at? So I'll show you some of the areas that we look at, and I think that's going to lead us to our final goal that we're going to highlight, and you're going to learn a lot about tonight is then how does that information that we're finding out lead to giving students what they need? And we had a key goal this year of making sure that our students have access to outside care and treatment if needed. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that tonight. So let's first talk about later data and assessment. This has been ongoing work that started years ago just to say, hey, what's the information we have? How do we assess in the social emotional space? The top two pieces of assessment of data are familiar to us, right? Trusted Adult Relationship Survey, co-curricular participation. Those numbers are actually from last spring, last year. So those are numbers that you've seen before. And again, you'll see those numbers coming again. They're on your board dashboard. Just note, co-curricular participation, we saw a 6% increase on that from the last time we surveyed. That's quite a few students, so we're happy with where those numbers are at, but we have action plans in places to continue to work through both of those. The third assessment piece you'll see there, and new this year, talked about a little bit this winter with y'all, is SABRES. And SABRES is a screener that our teachers fill out on social and emotional behaviors that impact learning and social and emotional behavior in school. And really this is a brief screener that can indicate really the overall health or unhealthiness of your school district. And truthfully, these numbers are really strong. What this tells us is that the majority of our population is doing really, really well. 92% of our elementary students were marked at low risk in the most recent winter screening. 94% of our middle school students that teachers fill out a screen on were marked as low risk. Those numbers are really, really strong for when you take a look at the overall health. At the high school level, we do what we call the VSAD. This happens at the conclusion of our Signs of Suicide presentation. It's a brief screener that our students actually take. This is ongoing, so I don't have data here to tell you, but what I will tell you is when our students take that screener at the high school level, that can lead, if there are indicators or concerns, to a risk of harm to self assessment. Risk of harm to self is a procedure that we implemented 5 years ago to make sure that we were streamlined. Any time that we would need to be in our processes around if a kid's making a threat to harm themselves or really shows any indication of that, and we have certain indicators that would lead to our risk of harm assessments. Just total number that we've actually carried out this year, and anytime this happens, we actually have 2 certified trained staff members. They're school support staff members, so they're your psychologists, your social workers, counselors. 2 staff members always are carrying out this assessment. We've done 322 of those this year. Last year we did 321, so you figure we got about 5 weeks left in the school year. We're a little bit ahead of where we're at, but anytime we get one of those pieces where there's a potential risk of harm, we do go through that thorough assessment. Last piece of data I just want to highlight is our hospitalizations. These are specific to emotional health or mental health reasons. At the high school level, currently we have had 97 high school students hospitalized this year, 20 middle school students hospitalized this year. That's comparable to last year. These can be for a variety of reasons. They're not always, and many times not from a referral from us. Many times they're parent-induced, they're taking their child in or whatever it may be, but anytime that happens, as you guys have heard through our emotional wellness program, that's where our emotional wellness coordinators kick in, and they're partnering in making sure, one, we're supporting the family, we're supporting the student, and then ultimately getting that student back in our graces and helping them transition back into school successfully. I give you this layout of the later data and assessment to paint the picture that if we go back to that programming and layers slide, there are some things that kind of all kids need, and there are some things that only a small amount of our students need. And in our buildings, our school support staff members and all of our teachers do a great job of connecting with kids. Our social workers, psychologists, counselors, emotional wellness coordinators, behavioral folks, they do a great job of providing support to students. But ultimately, it is their job to help the child access their education. And they're not providing the deep level of therapy or treatment or care that some of our students may need, right? So we recognize that, and one of our goals that we brought to you this year, part of our work plan, was to make sure that we were enhancing mental health support for our students that were in need, and really wanting to remove those barriers for our kids and for our families. And the most clearest path to do that, in my mind, and some of the folks that I work with in the mental health space in our district, was to GPS. To introduce you to Amit Thacker. Amit's just done tremendous work in a very, very short time with us, and he's going to tell you a lot about referral GPS and also give you insights into how it's benefited our students and family this year. So, Amit, it's my pleasure. I'm going to turn it over to you, and he's going to take the stage up there.
Does this need to be turned on, or you guys can hear me good? Perfect. Thank you guys for allowing me to come and speak with you. It's always weird having an audience behind you, so I may turn around half the time just to make sure you guys can see me as well. So I'll go ahead and start off this presentation, and I'm sure you guys know this more than most people. Every student that walks through the door at one of your schools has a story, and you guys are often tasked with making these high-level decisions that affect an entire student body or entire population that works in these school districts. But they all are made up of collective individuals that all each have their own story. So before I dive into showing you some of what we do with Referral GPS, I want to start with telling you a little bit about my story. So my name is Amit. As Dr. Slagi had said, I grew up in this area, actually in the Naperville, Aurora area. So I'm a graduate of District 204 in Indian Prairie. I left there and went to NIU, if I have any Huskies in the room with me. Shortly thereafter, went to Benedictine, actually right down the street. I joke with people for my entire educational career. I think I traveled 20 miles out of home. I have a wonderful family, as you can see from these pictures. It's a couple years old, but it's pretty evident for anybody looking that I married probably about 2 levels above what I should have. Because my wife is gorgeous and an amazing life partner for me, and she blessed me with 2 amazing kids. They're now 5 and 6 years old, actually both attending District 200 themselves. And as you guys were talking through the collective bargaining agreement, I had flashbacks of every dinner I have with my kids and how difficult it is to figure out how to get them to eat appropriately. And so I can only imagine what you guys go through on a regular basis, trying to struggle with all of the various things you do. I only have 2 at home, and I tell both the teachers that they've had at Bauer and the principal there that it's hard enough for me to wrangle the 2 of these. I don't know how you do with 30 in a classroom or 18 in a classroom or that many even in a school. I'm a business owner, so I own and operate Referral GPS. I also work with a couple different businesses in the area, specifically around mental health. That's been a passion of mine, and you'll see why that is in a few moments. I'm a mental health advocate, so I work on both the state and the federal level, oftentimes battling insurance, which sounds odd for someone so passionate about mental health, but anybody who's actually had to go through the mental health care system knows how difficult it is to work through the mental health insurance system, which is even more tedious than just the insurance system. My son actually has a kidney issue, and he went to Lurie's, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out everything from the acronyms in insurance to what doctor I need to take him to and how do I get United Healthcare to pay for it. And I've worked in healthcare for 15 years, and I was lost on many occasions. And so I can imagine those folks who are not only struggling with a mental health issue, but then trying to navigate the mental health system to figure out who do I talk to in what area. I volunteer at a number of different high school districts in the area. I'm very passionate about a young entrepreneurship program, the incubator program that you guys also have here as well. So I've sat and judged that program. I've done mentorship on that program. It's always exciting to see kids with a passion to figure out how to make something out of really nothing. So if you met me at like a cocktail party or a neighborhood barbecue, you'd say, this guy seems like he has his stuff together. Right? He's got a beautiful wife, a great family. He's a business owner. He contributes to our society. He seems like he's a mental health advocate, does a lot in this world. But the reality is the person that you meet today is not really the me of yesterday. So I grew up in a middle-class family here. My dad used to work for a company called Lucent, which, if any of you guys have been in the area for some time, was a very large employer, particularly in like the early 90s. And as any adolescent male, I loved playing football and video games. I guess not a lot has changed since I was a child. But football and video games, I used to spend a lot of my time in. And back then, I didn't do a lot in organized sports. I don't think it was as organized at that point. It was all neighborhood sports. So we joke with a lot of the old neighborhood friends that all of our hydration probably came each summer from garden hoses more than they did anywhere else. We used to, and there were no cell phones back then, so you go play basketball at like the rec center or the community center, and then you'd have to call your parents to pick you up, and no one ever had change, so you'd call them collect, and then you'd say, hey, Mom, I'm ready to be picked up, and then you'd hang up real quick so that would trigger them to come and actually pick you up. It was a different time than what we've grown up in today, some positives, some negatives. We had one big rule, which was come home before the streetlights came on. And that's how we knew it was like curfew, which was great during the summer. You'd stay out late, and wintertime you were home pretty quickly. Like I said, we didn't really have organized sports, but in 7th grade I tried out for our football team at Granger Middle School. And I was super ecstatic because I made the team. And I was a skinny beanpole child, but I was very fast. And so I made the team as a wide receiver. I found out about 2 days later, everyone who tried out made the team. But for those 2 days, I thought it was my athletic ability, and I really showed myself on that practice field. We used to have 2-a-day practices. I don't even know if they do that anymore, but 2-a-day practices are basically before school, you'd practice without your pads, and then after school, you'd have your pads. I was a prepubescent, skinny, like 12-year-old Indian child walking down Ogden with all of my pads, which really were bigger than I was. But every time I would go to practice, I would tell myself, especially when we had 2-a-days, today was going to be the day. I'm really going to show my coach how good I am. Because I joke that I made the team and I played wide receiver, but the reality is I played left bench. I didn't actually get on the field much, but every time I would tell myself, today is going to be the practice. Today's going to be the day I'm going to break out. So I used to go to sleep very early on those nights. I'd go to sleep like obnoxiously early, thinking if I get enough energy, I'll be able to do really well the next day. One night I went to sleep, it was probably 8:45, and I remember my brother teasing me for going to sleep that early. And I dozed off, dreaming of my breakout practice the next day. And I woke up at about 3 in the morning, obviously much earlier than I had expected to wake up. There was commotion outside of my room. So I'd opened my door, and I saw my brother pacing back and forth, and my mom was crying. and I couldn't quite figure out like what exactly was happening. And I looked over to my stairwell and saw that there was paramedics there that were actually bringing my dad down on a gurney, and he was like yelling things that didn't really make sense. Well, we don't have a history of mental health issues in our family, so I didn't quite understand what was happening. Even if we did have a history of mental health issues at that age of 12, 13 years old, you don't quite understand what's happening in the world. It turns out we lived in Aurora at the time, and they rushed my dad to Copley Hospital, and they did some scans on him and figured out that he was having a brain hemorrhage, which was something that he was born with but went undetected his entire life. And it just so happened that night he was hemorrhaging. Well, they don't have an emergency neurosurgery program at Copley Hospital, at least they didn't then. So they airlifted him that night to UIC, and they did about a 6.5-hour emergency neurosurgery on him. And the surgery was successful, but the outcome wasn't, because he spent the next 7.5 years in a coma, eventually passing away. So I went from what was a relatively normal childhood into my entire life turning upside down in a matter of a night, without really having any inkling of what was going to happen. Right? This wasn't something we prepared for. And everyone deals with trauma a little bit differently. My brother was 16 at the time, moved out of the house, and still has difficulty coming home. Now lives in LA. My mom, who had never paid a mortgage the week earlier, was trying to figure out how to raise 2 rambunctious adolescent boys and figure out how to care for her husband and run a household, right? So she was a mess, but held it together. I was in 7th grade, and 7th grader males in general don't make good decisions. And I now realize that what I became, there's a term for, which was oppositionally defiant. And almost anybody who resembled a position of authority in my life, I tried to push back on. And so I spent most of my 7th grade, 8th grade, and most of my high school being asked to leave the classroom. And it wasn't like I ever did anything that would get me expelled or suspended. I was just a royal pain in the butt, right? So I would figure out how to argue with the teacher about about the lesson that they were teaching, right? Or I would read ahead and then figure out, well, this isn't really what actually happens in the book. Let me tell you guys what actually happens. Things that most teachers would say, you're just being a disruption. And so I'd often find myself down at the dean's office. But almost every administrator, whether it be dean, assistant principal, or really any parent or adult that I would interact with, could notice pretty quickly, this kid's broken. Like there's something wrong with him. I just don't know what it is, and I don't really know how to fix it. And so oftentimes when I spent a lot of time down in the dean's office, I would find myself being asked to go to guidance or social work. And I didn't have a 504. I didn't have an IEP. I don't know that my mom even knew what that was. I'm not even sure if they had them back then. There were a few trusted adults in the social work office that same thing would lay eyes on me and say, this kid is broken. And they would spend time with me, not a long period of time, but 5 minutes, 6 minutes at a time, and sit down and say, just sit and talk to me about what's happening. How is your day going? And those 5 or 6 minutes that I would spend repeatedly with those trusted adults was the only safe stability I had in my life. And so I say that because one of your strategic goals in having an adult that you can turn to associated with the school district is paramount. It's probably one of the most important things for certain kids in your district who will otherwise not grow up to be who they're supposed to be. When I give this presentation to student services, what I tell them is thank you for the work that you do. You may never have a kid who comes back to you 25 years later and says thank you, but that's me. I'm saying thank you because I would be a fraction of who I am today if it wasn't for the work that they do. And so I'm honored to work with you guys as a board, with your student services team members, and really the community and parents that want so badly for the kids to grow up healthy, to have the support that they need to be able to do that. And I'll walk you through how Referral GPS partners with your district in doing that. So I started Referral GPS a few years ago. It's been about 5 years now, and that's back when I used to work at a psychiatric hospital here in Naperville called Linden Oaks Hospital. One of the departments I oversaw there was our crisis call center. And one of the most difficult positions I had in overseeing that department was when a family would call us, and you know that they're in crisis because you don't call a psychiatric hospital if you're just wondering what to do next, right? So you talk to a family over the phone, and you would realize pretty quickly you're not going to be a good fit for us. And there's a variety of reasons why that would occur. It's either we don't accept your insurance, and it's ungodly expensive to come here and pay a cash rate. You don't live anywhere close to us. I mean, there was one county in the state of Illinois that we didn't get a phone call from, right? And that's just because of the shortage of psychiatric beds in Illinois and really in the region. And it gets even worse when you start talking about children beds. You weren't acute enough, right? So parents are like, we're really struggling, right? They went through a bad breakup, and my daughter hasn't eaten in 3 days. Like, I need to get her hospitalized. And the reality is you're not going to meet level of care criteria because your daughter went through a bad breakup. Like, your insurance company will deny that care, and you'll be left with a gigantic bill. If that's something that you want to try and do, I guarantee you that our admitting physicians would still not allow you to be admitted, given what you've presented in this phone conversation. That's a hard conversation to have. And what you have at the end of that is someone bleeding on the other side, emotionally drained, and you're trying to help them, but you know you can't help them given the place that you are, right? And if I can't bring you to my hospital, where do I send you? And there was never a good answer for that. And the reality is the hospital, just like a school district or a number of other entities that are pseudo nonprofit or nonprofit world, it's still a business. There are still people that work there. You still have production and volume and budgets and everything else that every other business has to deal with. And so when I went to my manager, the president of the hospital at that time, and said, what do I do with the families that I can't bring here? And the reality was, or the response I got was, you got to tell them to call the number on the back of their insurance card. It's not your job to figure out where everyone goes. It's your job to figure out who needs to come here and help them come here. And that was very difficult ethically and morally because I'm on these calls, right? So it's not a decision that I would make lightly and say, this is just what we need to do. And I also know what it's like to call the number on the back of your insurance card, to sit on hold for 3.5 hours, to be sent a PDF document with 72 names and say, good luck, start calling. Half of the phone numbers don't work. Most of the people have a wait list. And so you're back to square one. And when you're going through a mental health crisis, you have a moment to act while it's happening. And if you don't act in that moment, things subside and you convince yourself, maybe I don't need this right now, until the next crisis. And you hope that that's not acute enough that you do need to be hospitalized. And so we had this long discussion at the hospital and at a board level, really, to say, this is something we need to do, right? And we need to figure out how to connect people better, even when it's not for us. Well, I came and I had this idea. We can create referral GPS, and we'll do it and I wanted to use it in my department, bring it there and show people, here's what we can do. Create a tool that has community resources in it that when I'm talking to a parent, I can quickly type in what I need, pull up who takes what insurance, who's in what area, and then give that to the parent instead of telling them to call the back of their insurance card. We almost had like a Shark Tank style presentation where I went and presented to the board of directors and said, this is what I need. Here's about how much money I need to build this software that I want so I can use it in my department. And by the way, there's probably 15 other departments who would use this. Our emergency department frequently has people come in either intoxicated or has a substance use issue or a depression issue. Most of the times they don't know what to do when that patient discharges, right? And you can't keep them in the ED. You want to give them some resources so they don't come back. Our primary care physicians actually prescribe more psychotropics than all of our psychiatrists, right? And so they often are in over their head when you start to get to 2, 3, 4 Schedule 1, Schedule 2 drugs and going, this is over my head from primary care. I did one rotation 20 years ago in psych. What do I do? Most of them have to do it because they can't find a psychiatrist. And so they end up prescribing more than what they're comfortable with or telling them, sorry, I've kind of hit it. So we said, this is another place they could use it. On our own units, right? In a hospital setting, it's crisis stabilization. You're going to be there for a short period of time and then transition back to the community or back to the school district. And so when we transition them out of acute care, we need to figure out where to connect them to. So another place that we could use this. So I presented this out to this group of esteemed individuals, probably 5 people there from the hospital board and hospital administrators. And one by one, they all started saying, "This is a great idea. We should do this. Fantastic idea. We should do this." Until we got to the last person who was over our finance department, who said, let me understand this real quick. You want me to give you, close to $100,000 to build a software to help you send patients outside of our health system that I don't bill for? Explain to me why this is a good investment for us. And so when you explain it that way, it makes me sound like an idiot. So I don't know that it's a great investment. I think it's the right thing to do. And the response was, great. So in 2 weeks from now, when your paycheck comes out, can I give you a slip that said you did the right thing? I said, well, obviously not. And he said, okay, same thing. We have a budget to run. I don't entirely know, so I vote no. Well, I already had 5 yeses. And so with the one no, I figured, hey, not really a big issue. Quickly, all 5 of those yeses started going, well, that is a good point. We aren't a software company. This isn't really what we do. This does seem way out of our realm. And eventually I was told, hey, I don't think this is going to work. So I left there like a dog that's just been dejected by his owner, tail between the legs, and went back and talked to folks on my level and just said, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like, I'm feeling really demoralized by this situation, knowing that we have and I spent 6 months creating this entire workbook on a business plan. And so my boss, who's the president of the hospital and also a mentor of mine, came to me and said, if you really want to do it that bad, you've already done all the work, why don't you do it yourself? And I think in one essence, she probably thought it'll be a pet project that he'll forget about, and then we can cross over this bridge and keep going. But as my wife tells me, I'm extremely stubborn when I get fixated on something. It's really how I got her. So it took me some time, and I built Referral GPS and basically started working with our hospital and then a few primary care physicians and asked to gather all the data they had and started populating this database so I could find places to send people to. Well, shortly after I built that for the hospital and I was still employed at the hospital, I was at a community meeting like this, and 2 local school districts were there, their assistant soups. And I was explaining to them what I had built and how awesome it was for me and my department. And they both said, we have the same problem. Like, our student services staff don't provide ongoing therapy. They're not meant to do that. And so we need to figure out where to send students and families to. And we have binders. We have shoebox full of business cards. We have old Excel documents that we use to try and figure out who takes what insurance and who's located where, who has what specialty. It's a pain in the butt. We spend a lot of time doing it, and frankly, we don't do a great job at it. Can we use your tool? And it was then that a light bulb sparked in me to say, well, I guess it's not just us at the hospital that have this issue. There's probably other institutions. And so I launched Referral GPS kind of full force at that point, working now with hospitals, schools, primary care physicians, pediatricians, a few colleges in the area, and a couple police departments, specifically police departments that have social workers inside of them or crime victim advocates that are helping people get connected into care. The whole idea is when you look for care, specifically on the therapy or psychiatric level, how do I find it quickly, and how do I share that with the families? Beyond that, we started to get a lot of feedback, and I can walk you through what some of that looks like. Is some families will get this information and follow up, but we also know that some families need a little bit more hand-holding than others. And much to what Dr. Salagi had said, there's not every solution that works for every family, but some families do really need that extra step, either figuring out their insurance, or I've called a couple places and everyone has a wait list. So how can I figure out someone who can actually accept me? Or I'm just not sure what I need, right? My daughter's depressed, but she has some good days and some bad days. I'm not entirely sure if she should be in an intensive outpatient program or does she need to see a therapist. Is medication appropriate at this juncture? What age would it be appropriate? Given what I'm explaining to you, what would you recommend? So to do all of that, we started a navigation service on top of Referral GPS. So basically there's kind of 3 components that we do with the district. The first is we give your student services staff the ability to search for area therapists and psychiatric prescribers. And they can search from anything by insurance to specialty, to what age you treat, to what language you speak, to what your cultural background is, right? So you could slice and dice the data in many different ways. And then you can either email or text that information directly to a parent. So that's very helpful for staff to be able to do. And then there's the extra hand-holding. We call that navigation. So if your staff has a particular family that they want to have navigated, basically a warm handoff, they have the ability to log into our tool and refer that family over to us once they've collected all the appropriate releases of information. When that family gets sent over to us, we send a text message or an email over to the family for them to schedule time when it's convenient for them. So we have a lot of families who schedule time to talk to us while they drive to work. Can I talk to you during my lunchtime? Because the reality is sometimes that's the only time I'm alone and I can talk to you about some of the sensitive stuff. And so we book a time, we talk to them over the phone, and we do about a 45 to 50-minute triage. And that triage is going through safety concerns. It's going through some of the medical, psychosocial history. It's really understanding what's happening from an environmental perspective and then providing a recommendation. And that recommendation may be to seek therapy, seek hospitalization, seek residential care, a variety of different components. Along with that recommendation, we're finding what that is. So if I talk to a mother tomorrow morning and I say, hey, at the end of our conversation, I think a therapist would be best for both your daughter and her sister, we don't stop there. We go, and you have Humana insurance, let me find a therapist that has availability for you. And then we start our research. So then we have a team of navigators that basically call on different practices on a daily basis all over the Chicagoland area to find availability, because that's something we heard a lot of from our school student services folks and from our parents. Thanks for the resources. It's an 8-month waiting period. What do you want me to do? So because we call these practices on such a regular basis, we know who has what availability where, or we have a little bit of influence, I should say, in trying to cut the line, which never sounds fair, cutting the line. But I call a practice owner and say, I've sent you 10 referrals last week. I need you to do me a solid. This patient's really acute. Fit them in somewhere. And they will. Versus a parent who's calling and saying, I just really need to get in. And they'll say, I had 4 call before you. I'll put you on the waiting list and we'll figure out what we need to do. So that's a component that we work with your student services staff. And then one piece that came out recently working with school districts, and we work with about 35 school districts in the Chicagoland area. All of them are within about a 30-mile radius of you guys. That being said, you guys are probably one of the most well-run districts I work with. And I don't just say that because my kids go here and because we've chosen to live here. But I got to say, even at the elementary level, and a shout out to Bauer, it's probably some of the best staff I think I've encountered in many of the schools and districts that I've been in. Side comment. On top of what happens with student services, there are going to be families that no matter how much you outreach to, will never talk to a school district official. And the reason for that is there is a stigma involved with mental health. And so there's been this age-old, I don't want this to go on my kid's permanent record, right? Which is something we battle all the time, that stigma with our parents, to let them know, like, this is not a permanent record issue. But regardless of that, people often don't want to talk about their mental health issues. It's not a casserole issue, like most people call when you got a broken leg, or I have an issue with a rolled ankle, and people come around to really support you. With mental health, most people suffer in silence. And so what we realize is if we tell people within the school district that the only way that they can access services is to go through student services, we're limiting the population that we reach by those that are comfortable to talk about the mental health issues happening in their house. And we're alienating a large majority of folks that want to probably reach out, but if you tell them the only door in is through that door, otherwise there's no help for you, they're not going to walk through that door. And so what we launched is an anonymous co-branded website for the district, which allows parents to go on and search for resources themselves or ask for care navigation themselves. And when they ask for it themselves, then we do the same process where we triage, help them find appointments, and get them connected. And then we talk to them about the aspect of involving the school. And we tell them about how much better it is when we have the school involved in student services to at least know about this case that we're working on, because it can bring everyone together to really help provide that support around the student. I'll tell you, about 50% of the parents say that's a good idea. And we go online on the district website and we find who that student services member is, who's associated with that student. and we send them a random email that says, hey, you haven't heard from me before, but I'm working with Chris Smith today, and I just want to give you an update. I have their permission to share this with you. Here's what we've done. The other 50% say, absolutely not. I do not want anyone to know about what's happening. The whole reason I access this service is because it's anonymous and it's not through the school district. And we respect that privacy. So those are the different kind of components that we work with parents and with students. Those are the three major pieces that we work with. And I'm going to walk you through some of the results since we've been partnering with you guys of what we've been able to see through this district. So since we launched, about 5,100 treatment searches have been done from student services staff on our platform, which is a lot. Most frequent presenting issues wasn't really a surprise to me, and I'll tell you this isn't very variable from each of the districts that I work with in the radius around here. Anxiety, depression, stress management, and for our public anonymous site, it's parenting strategies. Because I think as much as our students are struggling, our parents are really struggling. They're struggling on how to be good parents and how to be good spouses and keep it kind of all together and figure out how to continue on in this post-COVID world with all the stress that's really here. Talked about the co-branded website, and we've had 161 families that have searched for resources on that co-branded website since we've launched, which is a relatively high number comparative to some of the other school districts that we work with, which shows me that there's a significant need in our community in District 200. This is a little bit more of the detail, and I won't walk through every one of these numbers, but the highlights that I want to point out is we've had 36 families self-refer themselves into care navigation, which is, hey, I've looked online, but I need more help than that, right? So 36 individual families have actually reached out to us and have set up appointments with us to try and figure out how to get into care. And then 108 families have been referred through student services to go through care navigation. So those two components tell me, like, is there not only a large need for people to find services and search on their own, there's also a really high need in finding how to get into those services. And a lot of that has to do with, again, the wait list. There's simply not enough prescribers, particularly on the psychiatric medication side, and not enough therapists that take enough insurance for people to say, I can get an appointment within a week wherever I want to. They truly have to work at it. And what we want to do is find them at that intersection so they don't give up until the next crisis where they have to be more acute and then they do have to be hospitalized. And that's really what we're trying to avoid. I pulled out a case example, de-identified all the information on here, but I want to pull out this case example to show you guys just one of the cases that we worked on within the district. So we had a care navigation request that came through the public anonymous website where a parent said, hey, I really need to talk to someone about my daughter. During the call, the mom had described some anxiety, self-esteem, and really the food avoidance issue, which sparked kind of the red flag as we were talking to it, because she mirrored the food avoidance component to a lot of the comments that her daughter was making about her self-image, and her body image, and that really led us down a different path than if it was just anxiety and self-esteem. So she further explained that her daughter was recently started skipping lunch. She noticed not only at school, but at home on weekends. She was disconnected during mealtime and frequently commenting on her weight. I feel fat. I've gained a lot of weight. I shouldn't be eating that extra cookie. I don't want any cookie at all, right? So a lot of those components, mom was really worried, rightfully so, that if she didn't address this, that it would turn into a full-blown eating disorder. And she has another daughter who's had an eating disorder, right? So mom seeing these attributes come out, knew very early on, I need to nip this in the butt, because if I don't, I've seen what travesty this can cause, and I need to try to get her into treatment immediately. So we set up time with her, and we first focused on an appropriate therapist who specializes in both self-esteem and body image concerns. Because I'll tell you, not every therapist is made equally or trained equally, which is similar to if you have a neurosurgery, you're not going to go to your pediatrician and say, are you ready with the scalpel? You really want someone who specializes in that particular component, especially when you're talking about eating disorders, substance use, some of the more nuanced components that you do treat much differently in mental health than you would basic depression. So she also wanted to see someone in person. You know, we talked a lot about telehealth and the fact that that would open up options for availability. In the state of Illinois, we'd have the ability to search through the entire state. There's also reciprocity for certain psychologists, for example, where you can go into different states and be able to have someone who may be a complete expert but is located in Louisiana through reciprocity, could actually see her through her insurance. So we talked about those components, but Mom had some real strong opinions on in-person care. And we couldn't really push back because from a clinical opinion or point of view, and from really just from what we've seen throughout this time, in-person care is more than likely going to be like the best quality of care. But the reality is not everyone can go at that time, have transportation issues or availability. And so we always offer that up, and she really wanted in-person care, and we said that makes sense. She also wanted to meet with a therapist about parenting strategies because she was struggling. Am I doing things at home that are causing her to have these self-esteem issues, these body image issues, these eating disorder issues? Are there comments that we make that either me or my husband make? Are there components that we talk about? You know, you shouldn't eat that. You should exercise. We should all exercise. And so she really wanted to speak with either a dietitian or a therapist who can tell her a little bit more about kind of how to work through that from a parenting strategy perspective. So first we told her, we're going to focus on your daughter. That's our first and foremost kind of goal here. After that, we'll look for a therapist for you as well. And we contacted 6 different clinical practices, most of which had a waiting list, but we were able to secure an appointment, and total end time from speaking with Mom to getting her into an appointment was 9 days. Now, in the mental health world, that's difficult to do. And really, this was just calling and calling and calling, and the practices that we knew were really good at treating this, even though they had wait lists, we'd say, call us. We're going to call you every day, and when you have a cancellation, we're going to take that cancellation. And we became so annoying to the practice that the first cancellation they had, they're like, we're just going to call you. We're going to call you and give it to you because you need to stop calling us. And I don't mind being that annoying guy when I'm helping someone get into care. So that worked really well. We were also able to find Mom an appointment with a therapist who can talk about parenting strategies. That was a little bit farther out, and it just wasn't as acute as getting her daughter in. So this is a case example really from this district. I wanted to share it with you guys because stats provides one level of information, but hearing it, I feel like from a specific case, at least for me, it makes it so much more real. That's my presentation. I don't have a ton more for you guys. I want to say thank you for allowing me to come speak to you guys. Thank you for the work that you do, both current board and new board coming in. I am a direct benefit from the work that you guys do. My family is a direct benefit from the work that you guys do, so I really appreciate all of the work that you guys do and allowing me to come speak with you today.
Any questions for Dr. Salagi?
There's 3 questions. How do parents know about this? How do we get them knowledgeable of the resource? How do we promote it in the future to parents? And then I guess finally, how do we kind of educate and train our staff within those departments to make sure they can optimize the use of this to the fullest advantage?
It's a great question. I prematurely sat down. Sorry. So how do we? I'll knock all 3 of them. So first is how do parents know about it? So we do, with each district we work with, we do like a multi-pronged approach to facilitate spreading the word about this information. First is through school newsletters. So we have information that we package in a school newsletter and sent out in an e-blast. Second is the district website. And all of this really points back to 2 components. One is student services is here for you, right? And we have the ability to talk to you and you can access services through here. Or B, we have an anonymous version for you to, anonymous path for you to go down to find resources yourself. And so I think that's where most of the traffic has been driven. I'll tell you between, in all of the districts that we work with, the most effective mode of communication are school-specific newsletters. I have no idea why that is, but every parent will read a newsletter about their school. Not as many will read the district newsletter. Not as many will read or look at the district emails that come out. But for some reason, school-specific, and I think it's the idea of being hyper-local. Why do we all watch local news versus watching world news every day? It's because you want to know stuff that's relevant really to you. So that was one component. We saw a lot of traction when that information went out. How does student services know about it? So we do trainings with them annually, typically in the beginning of the school year. And then if there's staff that are hired throughout the year, we'll do kind of mini Zoom trainings. Me or one of my staff, typically a group of us, will come and do this training with the school district with all of student services. We'll pick a couple different days and go through it with them, both with new staff and with existing staff. Reason we do it annually is there's often new things that we create. So I'll give you an example of that. We work with Addison School District, and one of the big things that they came back to us with is not every one of our parents has access to an email. And so if I can only share this information via email, I'm losing some parents. Do you have another way for me to share it? Now, you could print or email, but print is never going to get there on time, if it gets there on time. And obviously, if the email was an issue. And so we brainstormed with the school district, and they said, is there a way to come up with a text messaging program where we can text them out of your tool, because I don't want my student services using their personal cell phones to text information. So we created that for that district and then spread it all throughout the other districts that we work with. So there's an ability to text resources to them. So in these additional trainings that we do, we kind of train folks on, here's some new things that you guys have for you. What was the last piece?
How do we continue to promote this to make sure that our parents know about this? You know, is this in the handbook? Is it school orientation?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think Amit spoke to the promotion of it. Those continue trainings. So when Amit says we've trained all of our student support staff members, also did a training for all of our administrators as well. So that awareness of it, along with the newsletters, that will continue to put it out there. So a lot of when you see that 5,128 searches and 928 resources given, that's our folks, that's parents that our folks are already working with. So a lot of times our folks are already working with parents. That's our folks internally have given those resources out or been shared out. So I think a lot of it is building within as well, right?
And I think it's annually, because we have to continue to talk about it, one, from a normalization and stigma perspective, but two, to keep it top of mind. So I feel like every year with every district, we have that conversation with communications to just say, I don't know how it fits in with your calendar, but can you fit this in, right? And have a blurb about it to remind parents that this is available at a school level, along with student services having that information kind of throughout it. The other component is we work with a lot of families through the summer, because as you know, student services aren't in full force during the summer. So oftentimes what student services will do is have referral GPS as well as other resources like NAMI or National Suicide Hotline available on their away messages. So if a parent reaches out during the summer and says, hey, I'm still struggling, or this just happened at home, any resources, on the away message comes up, here's some national resources and here's a local resource. And so we often have families that reach out to us through the summer just through that communication. Some student services staff will actually put it in their email signature as well. Great questions. Thank you.
I have a question. I think it's about 60 different languages that are spoken in our district. How do families that don't speak English navigate this thing?
Yeah, great question. Every page on the site has a translation component built into it. So you can pick any language that Google offers, which there's like 170 different languages. So I'll preface this answer with I wish I was smart enough to build what you guys have seen today. I'm not. My idea was to build a database that I could find people in to make my job easier. It was very selfish, the reason I created this. All of the tools and things that you've seen in this tool now are all built by feedback from the school districts. So language was one component where they said, not only do I want to be able to see the information in a different language, but when I send it to a parent, I need that to be in a different language, because if you send a message to a parent that says, click this link to learn about this therapist, and if English is not their primary language and that doesn't mean anything to them, then they're never going to follow through with what you're sending them. So not only do we have language kind of as a filter, but we need that message to also be. So there is actually a version to be able, shouldn't say version, but a feature where you can translate every email that you send out to a family
And then the link that they click to view a therapist profile will also be in that same language that you've selected. So that's a component that we do have covered. And we have therapists that speak almost every language. When we have care navigation that comes into us to a language that one of our staff doesn't speak, we work with the DuPage Federation to actually have interpreters on the line to be able to speak with the parents in their native language to do the triage conversation as well. It's a great question.
Any other questions or comments?
I do. First, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Slaggy. This is really important work. As a parent who might not have a child who's in crisis, but is aware enough to know that my child could maybe use talking to somebody, you know, for a wide variety of reasons. Kind of piggybacking on what Brad said, I just went on our district website and then I went to the high school website where my kids are here. And as it's going, you know, I think that's great. I agree, like going through the school's newsletters, I think parents are more reading those more. On the district website, so it's listed under the parents tab, under resources towards the bottom, and it says referral GPS. No offense. I don't know what that is if I am just looking at it. And so I'm wondering if in the navigation of the website where it says referral GPS, if like right underneath it we can put in parentheses or something, mental health support, something, I don't know what that is, but something that identifies what referral GPS is. So that's just a suggestion. And then again, I'm only on the one page, and actually, I know we're doing our website, so this might all change. But
taking notes though, Susan.
But okay. So I'm just on my high school on Wheaton Warrenville South actual like school page. So under student services, there is additional services, and it lists health services, school psychologists, social work services, and emotional wellness services. When I click on those links, what comes up are the people. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Let's see. Health. Okay, wait, no. Yeah, so it's not under that I can see here under health services. But when I click on school psychologist, social work, and emotional wellness, those are people that gives me. And I'm wondering if on that page too, we can still list the people, but put the resource there too. I don't know if that's possible.
Referral GPS.
Yeah,
So
like
the point of that is you just want to make sure it's clearly noted on the website and described.
yeah. So like
can do
on the South page under student services, when I click on school psychologist, it
No,
gives me all the names of
Yep,
the school
I
psychologists.
hear you. You want to make
Yep.
sure that this is prominently
on that page with the school psychologist.
feedback noted.
Yeah, so that it's listed in the places where where parents would go to look for mental health. What kind of mental health services does the district provide? If I'm starting from square one, just as a parent, so I would just put this information where parents would logistically go or start from. You know, so that's my feedback is so that this is really available. Where people are going to look for it, and then and just to make it clear what referral GPS is.
Got it.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
So, but thank you very much for your work.
Definitely.
Anybody else?
Just a note, thank you. So I was quickly looking, because I don't remember seeing this in newsletters that have come from middle school or high school, so I'm kind of looking through, and maybe it was mentioned in one, or is it, I think it would be worth repeating in newsletters like each week or however often they come out. It's different based on school, because I don't remember seeing it
Yeah.
as a parent.
Amit doesn't take that question. That's
Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, because we're responsible for making sure that message is out there. So thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Slaggy.
Definitely. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay. There is no other further business to come before the board, so I'm going to move to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Illinois Open Meetings Act exemptions 5 ILCS 120/2 subparagraph C subparagraph 1 and 5 ILCS 120/2 subparagraph C subparagraph 9. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hanlon, Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the vote? Yes.
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 Okay, action is expected following the closed session.